Well, Kim, I think, we can
Good to get
let
going.
everybody kind of filter in for another minute or so, but for those of you all that are here, thanks for joining us again. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is really fun. I feel like we've been on this like summer adventure together um, of trying to learn new things and just exploring the world through Zoom a little bit. Same as usual for everyone that's used to it, but we'll do our best to keep mics muted during the presentation. If we're lucky enough to have a nice small crowd, maybe we'll have some audio questions at the end, but we won't interrupt you while you're chatting, Kim, today. So just throw any questions you have in the chat box. Kim will get to them if she can, and like usual, I'll save any that we need to circle back to at the end. I am really excited for this today. Kim is one of our awesome instructors. She led our marine mammals program. Is that right? Up in Vancouver a couple summers ago.
British
And
Columbia, yeah.
British Columbia, yeah. And is just so smart with all of these things. And I just can't wait to dive a little deeper and learn something new today, especially about cold places when I'm sweating it out in North Carolina. So I'll let you go ahead and get started, but we're excited to have you. Thanks.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so hi everyone. I'd like to welcome you to my presentation on beluga ecology and conservation. Today I'm going to start by providing a general overview of beluga. Then we're going to transition to talking about some of the different ways to conduct research on belugas. I like to keep my presentations fairly interactive, so feel free to post some questions or comments during the talk in the chat box like Virginia mentioned. Any that I don't get to, Virginia will compile for me and I will try to answer those at the end. All right, so to start, my name is Kimberly Ovitz and I am the former instructor for Broadreach's British Columbia Marine Mammal Studies program. A pretty varied academic background that I won't go into great detail on, but for the past few years, I've worked in the realm of fish and marine mammal ecology and conservation. Currently, I'm a PhD student at the University of Manitoba in Canada, and my research aims to bring together different types of spatial data on beluga to understand beluga movement ecology in the Beaufort Sea. So here's just a quick visual illustrating some of the places that I have been operating in. For the past 2 years, I have been working in South Central Alaska, supporting beluga monitoring and management efforts. I am now based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I'm currently speaking to you from. However, my field work is primarily based in the Inuvialuit settlement region, located in the Northwest Territories, bordering on the Arctic Ocean. So now that we are situated, we will begin. So belugas are an iconic and charismatic megafauna species, and one that has been all over the news lately. Whether it's from the arrival of Vladimir, the Russian spy whale in Norway, or the Baja beluga down in Southern California that's meandering off the coast. And finally, the Russian whale jail that some of you might be familiar with. This was found last year, housing more than 80 beluga and 11 killer whales in small confined pens that were awaiting export to marine parks in Asia. So though these are prolific news stories, the behavior of the whales represented in these cases is not particularly representative of the behavior of wild belugas, which for instance, don't typically play fetch with boaters or embark on 1,000-mile solo journeys into the tropics. So today we're going to set the record straight and learn more about belugas in their natural habitat. So we're going to begin with the basics, which is that belugas are marine mammals. If there are any students here that can tell me some of the defining characteristics of marine mammals in the chat box, that would be awesome. I'll give you just a few seconds and then I'll start rattling them off. Does anyone know what any of these characteristics are? Yeah, nice. One person said hair. Perfect. Yeah, awesome. We have warm-blooded, breathing air, mammary glands, giving birth. Okay, everyone knows everything, so I don't even have to present this slide. This is great. So yeah, some of the defining characteristics of marine mammals include breathing air with lungs, maintaining a constant inner body temperature, giving birth to live young, although there are a few exceptions to this, the presence of hair at some stages in their life or development, and then mothers producing milk for young. And then what makes marine mammals marine is that, of course, they are adapted to live and thrive in the marine environment in which they rely on for food and protection. In the case of belugas specifically, they're adapted to live in subarctic and Arctic marine environments. So we're going to talk just briefly about beluga taxonomy, which is the science of naming and classifying organisms. We've already established that belugas are marine mammals, and millions of years ago, they actually evolved from land mammals. Belugas belong to the infraorder Cetacea, so they're cetaceans, which includes dolphins, whales, and porpoises. And this is further divided into two suborders, the first being the mysticetes, and the second being the odontocetes. So the mysticetes are your baleen whales, like humpback whales and fin whales, and odontocetes are your toothed whales, which includes beluga. So these two suborders split off from one another around 34 million years ago, and there are a number of differences between the baleen whales and the toothed whales, aside from their feeding strategies, including that mysticetes tend to be more solitary in nature, whereas odontocetes form large pods and are highly social. So as belugas have teeth, they fall under odontocetes, and they're actually in the family Monodontidae, which means one-toothed, and they are in this family alongside narwhal. The scientific name for beluga is Delphinapterus leucus. If we have time at the end here, I'll show a quick link of narwhal and beluga cohabiting together in the St. Lawrence estuary. That's pretty uncommon, but over the past few years, a juvenile narwhal has been found swimming with a pod of young male belugas. There's also apparently some talk about being hybridization between the two, as a skull was recently found, indicating that maybe a beluga and a narwhal procreated. So belugas are adapted to living in the marine environment, as is evidenced by their streamlined shape and the presence of their tail fluke and pectoral fins, which provide beluga with propulsion and facilitate their navigation in the water. Beluga are also adapted for communicating in the marine environment and use their melon atop their forehead. This is comprised of fatty tissue. It's sort of that bulb on the top of its forehead. They use this to channel sound, find food, and communicate with other belugas. And what they're using to find food is echolocation. So belugas are extremely vocal and make a wide range of calls, and therefore are known as the canaries of the sea. Contrary to many cetaceans, belugas also have unfused neck vertebrae, which provides them considerable maneuverability of their head and their neck. So they move their head around a lot more than other whales. As we mentioned before, beluga have teeth on both their lower and upper jaws, and these teeth are conical in shape, which they use to grab and tear their prey rather than chewing their prey, and then they swallow their prey either whole or in large chunks. Lastly, beluga have two particular adaptations for living in the Arctic environment that we have not yet discussed today. Can anyone in the chat box think about what these adaptations might be? Something unique to beluga that allows them to thrive in the Arctic. I'll give you 10 seconds. Yeah, good. Blubber, excellent. Yeah, perfect. Someone said white skin. That is correct. There's one more. So technically there's three we didn't discuss. So the first is that they're white in color, and this of course allows them to blend into an ice-covered environment. So this is useful for avoiding predation. And then the other is that they don't have a dorsal fin. So when we think about, killer whales, they have a very, very tall dorsal fin, and this would inhibit them from being able to swim under the ice. So both beluga and narwhal don't have a dorsal fin, and this enables them to thrive in ice-covered environments. And they actually often are swimming amidst large ice flows or under large tracts of sea ice. Excellent. So we are very familiar with the image of the white beluga. However, belugas are actually born very dark gray or black and slowly lighten in color as they mature. So this image here shows belugas of different ages swimming alongside one another. You can see the dark gray calf on the left there swimming next to what is likely a juvenile whale, and then on the right and up the white adult. Here is another quick image of a mother and calf swimming together. This is in the Kenai River in Alaska at one of my field sites. You can just barely see the small gray calf to the rear of the mother. So when belugas are fully grown, they can weigh more than 3,000 pounds and measure up to 16 feet in length. The males tend to be a little bit larger than the females, which is called sexual dimorphism. Initially, it was thought that belugas lived to be about 30 years of age. However, recent studies have actually indicated that belugas can live up to be around 80, so much more like a human lifespan. Although color and size are indications of a beluga's age, scientists typically use more exact methods to age belugas, and this can include counting the growth layer groups in a beluga's teeth. Just like the rings in a tree, the dent in a beluga's teeth forms layers every year. So you can count those to estimate its age, or also scientists measure the aspartic acid content in a beluga's eye, which is supposed to be a very exact method. However, these methods only work with deceased beluga, so it's a little bit trickier to age live belugas since you're often relying on observation. So today there are an estimated 150,000 belugas worldwide, and this is delineated into 21 recognized stocks of extant or living belugas. A stock is a discrete group of beluga that is often geographically isolated, at least to some extent, as well as is genetically distinct from other beluga stocks. Each stock essentially functions as its own self-sustaining unit, although sometimes the range of different stocks might overlap and these individuals may interact with one another, as is the case with several stocks off the coast of Alaska. Currently, the largest beluga stock is located in Canada's Western Hudson Bay and contains 54,000 belugas, whereas the smallest is located in Cook Inlet, Alaska, which is outside of Anchorage, and that contains only 300 beluga. This is where I've been working. So this population is listed as critically endangered, and several other stocks are thought to be extirpated or extinct, which includes the Ungava Bay population or stock, the Cumberland Sound stock, and the Southwest Greenland stock. So belugas are distributed throughout subarctic and Arctic environments in the circumpolar north and are found in the United States, Canada, Russia, Norway, and Greenland. Some beluga populations are highly migratory and make long seasonal migrations between their wintering and summering grounds. However, others are completely sedentary and really don't migrate at all. There are 5 populations found in Alaska, which includes the Cook Inlet, Bristol Bay, Eastern Bering Sea, Eastern Chukchi Sea, and Eastern Beaufort Sea stocks, the latter of which you can see on the image on the right migrates into Canadian waters, into the Canadian Beaufort Sea. So that's the other population that I study. Then there are 7 populations found in Canada, including the Eastern High Arctic stock, which you can see migrates to Greenland, the Western Hudson Bay stock, Eastern Hudson Bay, James Bay, Ungava Bay, which is functionally extinct, Cumberland Sound, and then in the St. Lawrence estuary also. And some of those St. Lawrence whales occasionally make their way down to New York City. So if you hear of any sightings out by New York, that's where they're coming from. There's also another small group of whales found in Yakutat in southern Alaska. This is just like a handful of whales that are down on the south coast there. And they're not recognized as their own stock, even though they don't seem to interact with any other populations. So during the ice-free months, belugas are often found in shallow nearshore environments, including in estuaries and in rivers. And in fact, on various occasions, belugas have been sighted hundreds of kilometers up rivers in both Alaska and Russia. So imagine being 600 kilometers up a river and you see a pod of belugas. This isn't totally uncommon and it often happens in large rivers in the north. They're also found in deeper waters offshore where they make deep dives to the ocean bottom, presumably feeding on Arctic cod and other benthic prey or prey that lives along the bottom of the ocean. The stars in the figure here on the right represent 1,000-meter dives made by tagged individuals in the Beaufort Sea. So they do actually make pretty deep dives, often targeting cod. As waters freeze in the fall and sea ice expands throughout the Arctic, migratory belugas return to their wintering grounds. And the green dots in this image on the right also illustrates that. That is these belugas returning to their wintering grounds in the Bering Sea from the Arctic Ocean as the sea ice is starting to form and freeze over. So belugas are opportunistic feeders and represent an important predator in Arctic marine food webs. Their diets vary depending on geographic location and season. Belugas are preyed on by several different predators, including killer whales, polar bears, and of course, people. There's actually some recent articles that have been coming out showing that polar bears have developed a specialized beluga feeding strategy where they wait in the shallows on rocks and then pounce as the whale comes by. But sometimes they also find belugas that are trapped in the ice in a hole and they'll feed there. So that's a pretty good setup for a polar bear. In turn, belugas prey on a wide variety of organisms and feed in the water column and also along the benthos. So their diet is based largely on fish like salmon, capelin, or Arctic cod. But they also do eat shrimp and crabs and worms and octopus. So they're pretty generalist feeders in that way. And the distribution of their predators and prey also influences beluga distribution. So obviously beluga want to go where they find food and where they can avoid the risk of predation. There are a number of human uses for beluga, the primary being subsistence harvest. So beluga have been harvested by indigenous communities in Russia, Greenland, and Canada for centuries. And for many of these communities, beluga remains a critical, traditional, and local food source. In some areas, belugas were also commercially harvested, in many cases by non-indigenous peoples over the 19th and 20th centuries. However, this practice has largely subsided with the passing of various marine mammal protection acts. Some populations have exhibited a decline in response to historic harvesting pressures, but for the most part, the remaining healthy populations are sustainably harvested and are also very carefully managed by indigenous communities working in tandem with beluga researchers and managers. So there's a trend now where these populations are co-managed or collectively managed by scientists and indigenous communities, and it seems to be working quite well, at least in the Canadian Arctic. Although traditional whale hunts look a little bit different today than they did in the past, beluga harvest continues to serve as an important purpose in northern communities in that it promotes the survival of traditional Inuit culture and also provides Inuit with nutritional local food sources. So it still remains something that's practiced today in many communities in the north, in Canada, in Alaska, and also in Russia and Greenland. Beluga are also commonly kept in aquariums, and many whales within aquaria were actually live captured from a wild stock. This live capture used to occur in North America until it was outlawed in the 1970s. However, high demand for live captured whales persists, especially from the US and China. The majority of live captures now take place in Russia, which we saw from the whale jail case last year. And also in 2013, the Georgia Aquarium requested a permit to import 18 wild captured beluga from Russia. But in the end, this permit was denied by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Although demand for beluga continues to rise in some areas of the world, global public opinion on this topic is changing. And in 2019, Canada officially banned the practice of keeping dolphins and whales in captivity. So we'll see how this continues to progress as other nations see what Canada's doing and respond to that. In addition to beluga viewing in aquaria, there is also some beluga watching that occurs in the wild in places like Churchill, Manitoba, and in the St. Lawrence estuary in Quebec, but this industry remains relatively small in scale. So I just got a question here from Kelsey saying, how is it outlawed and that demand still persists in the US? So since the 1970s, it's been illegal to capture marine mammals in US waters, and Canada has a similar law as well, but it's not necessarily illegal to import beluga from foreign waters for the purpose of like education and outreach. So there are forms that an institution, an accredited institution, can complete and request that a whale or many whales be sent into the United States and kept in facilities. But in Canada, that's no longer possible with the passing of this new law, and we'll see if the US follows suit. So moving on to beluga threats, and thank you, Kelsey, for your question. Beluga face a number of natural threats, including entrapment in ice, meaning that they actually get stuck in the sea ice when the Arctic Ocean freezes over. So sometimes you'll have a large pod, it can be hundreds of whales, that is going to migrate south. They migrate too late or take the wrong path and they're frozen over in the ice. Not ideal, but it does happen. Also, they can be stranded on land, which we see happen with many different cetaceans. They also face predation, of course, and pathogens. Perhaps the most concerning threat to beluga, however, are those of anthropogenic nature, or those threats which are caused by people. So beluga use sound to communicate in the water and also to find food. Therefore, any sound introduced into the marine environment from boat motors or energy exploration or drilling can interfere with these critical activities. Human activity is on the rise throughout the Arctic and the subarctic, and a particular issue is increasing motorized watercraft activity in shallow waters where beluga feed, and also is increasing large vessel activity throughout beluga migratory routes in the north. Interactions between beluga and watercrafts can contribute to disturbance and displacement from key habitat, but can also result in physical injury and even mortality in the event that a boat strike occurs. Overfishing also poses an issue in some areas, and this is particularly an issue for the endangered Cook Inlet beluga population, whose preferred prey source is Pacific salmon, which is a highly sought after commercial fish species. So we are seeing some competition between commercial fishers and beluga in some areas, and also some competition between beluga and other animal populations. So seals often go after the same prey as beluga, so you'll see that as well. Lastly, beluga are also affected by pollution and marine debris, such as microplastics. These can pose health and entanglement risks, and since beluga are traditionally harvested and consumed, the accumulation of contaminants in their tissues also poses a significant human health risk. So another major threat impacting the Arctic is, of course, climate change, which is transforming Arctic ecosystems. Over recent decades, scientists have been observing increasing air temperatures and receding sea ice all throughout the Arctic, and they predict that this trend will continue to intensify in coming years. This is concerning for a species like beluga, which is very ice associated and feeds on Arctic cod and other prey that are also closely linked to sea ice ecosystems in the Arctic. So as a result of climate change, scientists are also seeing range expansions in subarctic species like killer whale, which prey on beluga, and also salmon, which could potentially compete with beluga prey all throughout the Arctic. So we'll have to just wait and see what happens with those changes as they continue to occur. But it leaves this major question, that is, how will beluga respond to complex changes in their ecosystem as a result of human-induced climate change? So as human activity continues to increase and Arctic ecosystems transform under climate change, it is more important than ever to effectively manage and conserve beluga populations in order to ensure that they exist into the future. In order to be effective, these strategies should be place-based, meaning that they are designed according to the specific characteristics of a beluga stock. So that's why these stocks are delineated, is to make sure that they can be conserved appropriately according to their individual characteristics. And they should also be informed by the best available knowledge. And this knowledge can be research knowledge generated by scientists, but it can also include local and traditional ecological knowledge maintained by the human communities that interact with beluga on a regular basis. There are a vast number of ways to research and generate knowledge on beluga populations. And in the following slides, I'm going to talk to you about a few of these different methods that are used and how they're used before talking about a brief case study example. So some of the major differences in the methods used to study beluga are whether methods are invasive or non-invasive. Invasive methods often require the capture and handling of live whales, or the remote puncture of a whale's skin in the case of taking a tissue sample for a biopsy. Capture and handling can of course be stressful for the animal, and any punctures in the skin provide a possible pathway for infection, which could be a concern. However, these methods really do provide very high quality and often fine scale data that can be very useful for understanding how beluga interact with their environment. One useful and popular but invasive method is satellite tagging and tracking of individuals over space and time. So you can see in the picture here that this beluga has been captured and then fitted with a satellite tag or transmitter. So this is called like a spider tag or a backpack tag. And there are 3 prongs that go through the beluga's dorsal ridge, and then it's clamped on either side of the whale. So this tag will remain on this whale for anywhere from a month to 6 months, sometimes at the longest. So it can really tell us a lot about where that whale's going and how it's using its habitat, when it's migrating, what migratory pathways it's using, etc. So each time the whale surfaces, the satellite records its location and identifies the path that the whale is taking. And in this case, this whale is being tracked through the Beaufort Sea and then on its return migration to its wintering grounds. And I'll show you just a quick animation of what that looks like. So here we have locations of Chukchi and Beaufort Sea beluga whales that were tagged from 1993 and 2007. And this is an animation from a paper by Hauser et al. 2014, if you guys want to take a look. So I'm just going to hit play and you're going to watch the purple dots are the Chukchi Sea belugas moving, and the green are those that were tagged in the Beaufort Sea. So this is their movement in July. They're moving up into the Arctic and northeast in the Beaufort Sea. Then by September, you start to see them move west. And then by October, they're starting to move south. And by November, they are going through the Bering Strait and into the Bering Sea. So this is illustrating these whales moving into an area that is not ice covered as the sea freezes over in the Arctic Ocean and as sea ice expands throughout the Arctic Ocean. I just have a quick question here. Do different stocks exhibit different behavioral traits, and does this affect conservation efforts? Oop, I'm back here. That is a very good question. In terms of behavioral traits, you see sort of those fine scale differences for sure with like orcas, killer whales using very different like dialects to communicate with one another. In terms of fine scale behavioral traits with beluga, I'm not personally familiar if they have like different feeding strategies that were like different social behaviors. What you do see is different behaviors reflecting different prey being targeted, for instance, with feeding. So you see a lot of really deep dive behavior in the Beaufort Sea near like Viscount Melville Sound and Banks Island, where whales are diving over 1,000 meters to feed on Arctic cod. And you don't see that in a place like Cook Inlet, for instance, because that area is very shallow. So that might just be a product of the different habitats that these whales inhabit or the different prey that they're targeting. But that would be an example of a fine scale behavioral difference. In terms of like, do they have different calls or like social behavioral patterns? I have not seen work on that, but it's possible that they do. So that's something that I'll have to look into in greater detail. But thank you for your question, Isabel. So as I mentioned, some methods are non-invasive, which provides a great way to study the natural behavior of beluga with lower risk to the animal. One such example is through passive acoustic monitors, wherein researchers deploy underwater microphones called hydrophones to detect and monitor beluga presence in an area. This is great for identifying beluga presence and levels of human noise released into the marine environment. However, determining beluga absence from a space is actually much more complicated because beluga passing by a hydrophone may not be vocalizing and therefore may not be detected. Aerial surveys are another way of remotely examining beluga distribution and abundance without requiring the capture of live animals. Surveys are usually conducted by researchers inside a low-flying plane that scan and record beluga locations and group sizes. It's also becoming more popular, however, to use unmanned aircraft for this type of work. So people sometimes are using small drones instead of people in aircraft, which tends to be a lot safer for the people. So the image here is just an example of a group that you might encounter on an aerial survey. So you would be counting the number of whales there. And of course, you'd have to do a few flybys to make sure that you get the best average for that count, because sometimes whales are diving and you miss them in your initial pass. And this is a photo from a river actually that we found some belugas in the southern part of Cook Inlet in Alaska. So even though this looks like a pretty narrow and shallow space, there were a few whales in here, and it's not uncommon to see that. So direct observation from shore or from a boat is also a common way to study beluga behavior and distribution throughout their environment. This is typically feasible in the ice-free or low ice months, since ice can make it difficult to identify beluga. Shore-based monitoring is what I've been using in Alaska to look at beluga use of several different foraging sites. And what's really nice about shore-based monitoring is it's low cost and it's accessible. It's also really easy to train non-scientists to help you out. So it's really well suited for citizen science monitoring efforts or efforts that are more participatory. So photo identification is yet another great non-invasive way to research beluga. Photo ID researchers capture photographs of beluga, typically from shore or from a small boat, and then identify individuals using unique markings like scars. As time progresses and researchers collect more photos, they can then track an individual over time and across different sites, in addition to examining belugas used at different sites. Photo ID researchers can also provide information on an individual's health and body condition. So maybe they'll see like a wound over time, and they can examine how that wound is healing. They can also reflect on age, how a beluga is progressing, so they'll maybe look at skin color and see how long it takes for that whale to age from dark gray as a calf to white as an adult. And they can also look at things like reproductive status, by how many calves that whale has had, among other information. I just see a comment here, a question from Megan Beasley. Are they harder to ID because they lack a dorsal fin? It's a great question. A lot of photo ID efforts for other cetaceans use markings or the shape of a dorsal fin. Others use the tail fluke for humpbacks, for instance. For beluga, from my understanding, it's not a problem that they don't have a dorsal fin for photo ID. There's actually a lot of distinct markings that belugas have, either from scars or other coloration, and this is what photo ID researchers use and compile a catalog of. So it seems to work great for the Cook Inlet population. There's been a lot of photo ID done, and it's just been this really, really critical source of information for this population that really shouldn't be tagged, because it's already so vulnerable as an endangered population. So yeah, thanks for that question. So we've mostly been talking about studying beluga presence, distribution, and abundance, and have not talked much about beluga health, but of course there are a plethora of ways to study the health of live cetaceans, and also to study dead cetaceans. So doing necropsies or dissections of whales that are beach cast, or in some cases harvested. You can take samples from harvested whales through harvest-based monitoring programs. So these are just really amazing data sources. I'm not going to talk about it too in detail because health is not my background. I've participated in a few necropsies, but I really study beluga movement, so I'm not the best person to ask on this topic. But it really is fascinating. If you have the opportunity to ever get involved with a cetacean necropsy or dissection, I highly recommend it. It's just an amazing learning opportunity. And there's actually a lot of ways that you can get involved with a marine mammals stranding response team if that's of interest to you. So I recommend Googling that for your region and seeing what opportunities are available. So lastly, an excellent way to learn about beluga and northern ecosystems more generally is to talk to the people that interact with beluga on a regular basis. Northern communities have been observing and harvesting beluga for centuries and have passed this important knowledge down to younger generations, often by way of the oral tradition or storytelling. So because these individuals are living in these Arctic environments every day, they're often able to detect fine changes in their environment long before scientists can. So there are a number of tools for documenting this knowledge, like interviews and focus groups. And I really just cannot express more how important of a source of knowledge this is, and one that's often overlooked by scientists who really think that you may need to use like modern methods and high-tech technology to understand beluga. But there are other sources of information like local and traditional ecological knowledge, and also archival records. So you can study beluga populations from hundreds of years back just by looking at whalers' logbooks, for instance. There's a lot of different ways, a lot of different data sources that you can use that are sort of outside of the realm of how we conceive of science. So I wanted to provide you guys with just a quick case study on how I have been using shore-based monitoring to explore beluga habitat use in South Central Alaska. This study initially took place in the spring of 2017 and then resumed again in the fall of 2019. So the study examined beluga occurrence in the Kenai River and their use of the Kenai River, which is Alaska's most heavily fished river. So this river experiences a ton of fishing pressure. It's home to a commercial fleet and also is the site of a big personal use fishery where people go on the shore with large nets and capture salmon. There's also some set netting along like the sides of the river, along Cook Inlet. So it's an area that's really heavily used, and there's a lot of boat presence in the summer months. So beluga were known to use this river regularly during the summer, and this was in like the mid-1900s, but it was widely believed that their use of this area substantially decreased or ceased altogether after human activity in the region increased. So we monitored the lower river for about 3 hours a day between March 15th and May 31st in 2017, and aimed to record data on beluga presence, behavior, and interactions with humans. I also conducted 22 in-depth interviews with longtime residents and local knowledge holders in the region to understand how this area has been changing and how beluga use of this area has been changing over time. So we combined those anthropological methods with more typical science methods. Initially, we didn't expect to see any whales during our season, since many believe that belugas use the area infrequently, if at all. But to our pleasant surprise, we ended up actually seeing a lot of beluga activity. So we ended up seeing belugas in the Kenai River almost every day between late March and late April, which was a shock to us, thinking that we would go in seeing almost nothing. In all, we saw 41 groups. We observed a lot of feeding. When belugas were in the river, they spent a total of 4 or more hours in the river on average, and would travel pretty far upriver. So they'd come into the river mouth, and then we'd see them traveling 7 or more miles upstream. And some of these areas they're using are very, very narrow channels. And obviously a lot of boats use this area too. So that's concerning that we're seeing whales in an area that's narrow and confined right alongside multiple high-speed watercrafts. They seem to be using the area in times of the year where human activity is particularly low. So that might be a strategy that they're using to avoid that direct threat of watercraft. But obviously, more monitoring is needed to understand the extent to their use of this area and to what degree they are encountering watercrafts. We did see a few different interactions between watercrafts and beluga, and some other instances where like construction activity was taking place, dredging was taking place, and beluga were in the area. So definitely a lot of important threats to consider in the Kenai River. One of the things we were looking at too was the human activity levels in the area. So we used a small drone to capture photos from May to July. And this is just a quick shot of what the river looks like in May when human activity is very low, compared to what it looks like on a high use day in July. So in May, there's almost no activity whatsoever, and we were seeing belugas in the river until about early May. So all of April, late March, and then nothing in May. And then in July, it was hundreds of boats in the lower river every day and thousands of people lining the banks catching fish. So it's quite a different system between those 2 different months. We also conducted those interviews, as I mentioned, and the results of those were just really, really illuminating. Participants were able to reflect on the baseline conditions of what beluga activity was like in this area 50 and 60 years ago. And then they described what it's like now, where some of them are seeing belugas in the spring, but no longer in the summer. Some don't see belugas at all because they're only active in the summer. The people are only active in the summer, so they might be missing that activity in the spring. A lot of participants highlighted the increase in human activity as a concern of theirs. Some suggested that commercial fishermen may be targeting beluga with firearms, which is not something that is too surprising to me since we see that happen with stellar sea lions and seals, but it could be an issue for beluga that is not heavily explored yet. They also thought that increasing boat activity might be influencing prey dynamics, maybe dispersing prey and therefore dispersing beluga. So they offered a lot of really important insight that we would not have been able to glean if we had just done the monitoring alone. So I think this just really highlights the importance of doing this collaborative effort, both with local people and also by combining science methods from the natural sciences and from the social sciences together. So I just wanted to close up here quick with some possible recommendations for any students with us who are thinking about becoming a marine mammal researcher. So some of you may be interested in this career path, and I think it's a great one, so you should definitely keep pursuing it. I think many are under the impression that you have to be a biologist to be a marine mammal researcher, and I want to emphasize that that is definitely not necessarily the case. I have a pretty non-traditional background and ended up in this field of research, and it's just about finding the right path that works for you and thinking about what types of topics you really want to pursue throughout your academic and career path. A few areas of study that you can pursue and still be involved with marine mammals are biology, ecology, zoology, geography, environmental science, chemistry. Statistics is huge, huge, huge right now with monitoring wildlife populations. That's a great thing to pursue. Archaeology even, of course, anthropology, where you're working with people to learn about what they're seeing in their environments, and natural resource management. This does typically require a graduate degree. So if you are planning to pursue this route, plan to have like 6 to 8+ years of education after high school. But if you don't want to pursue that long academic path, you can pursue other routes like guiding. So working for a guide company that does like whale watching and naturalist interpretation. We could also get involved in education and outreach through AQUARIA, for instance. Someone just asked, who is the best marine mammal biologist? So that is Verena Gill, and she is with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Anchorage, Alaska, with the Protected Resources Division. She has been just like an exceptional mentor of mine, and she was my advisor for a program that I was recently working with in Alaska. So if you have the opportunity to work with her, I highly recommend it. Yeah, so Verena Gill, if you want to look up her papers. She does a lot of work with sea otters, and then this is us on a beluga aerial survey in Cook Inlet. The next person from Isabel asked, are there ways to get involved in marine mammal research, such as internships as an undergraduate? Thank you for that question. We will switch to our next page, which we will talk about that on. So how to gain knowledge and experience. You can volunteer and intern, most certainly. There may be opportunities to volunteer with citizen science efforts in your region. One example is the Great Whale Count in Hawaii. So this is like I think it's like a beach-based observation effort where during the gray whale migration past Hawaii, there are shore-based monitors who are counting the number of individuals that pass by. There's also the Alaska Beluga Monitoring Partnership in Anchorage, which is something that I started with Verena and a few other partners like the Beluga Whale Alliance and NOAA and Kenai Peninsula College and others. So that is a great opportunity. If you happen to live in Anchorage, it's really nice to volunteer with, but I know probably not a lot of people are from Alaska here. But there are other opportunities at your local zoo, aquarium, your natural history museum. Remember that you can work with specimens like archaeological specimens through which you can learn about beluga, even if you're not interacting with live beluga. So keep that in mind as an opportunity. You should also look into opportunities with state and federal governments or at a wildlife rehab facility in your area. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to just learn relevant skills like boat handling, photography, mapping, rehabbing animals that are not beluga, even organizational skills, project management skills, because these all come in really, really handy when you're applying to work in this field. And your background does not have to be in marine mammals. Most people coming into the marine mammal field have no background in marine mammals at all because that experience is not easy to get. So just be a little bit creative with how you think about pursuing those first steps in interning and volunteering, because there's a lot of ways that you can do it that don't revolve around handling marine mammals. Also, of course, you can take courses. So Broadreach offers some that might be of interest to people. There was the marine mammal course that I was teaching. That one's not available right now, but maybe in the future. And then there are other courses that do talk about marine mammals. I think in Italy is one, Greece is another. So there's a few opportunities that you can talk to Virginia or someone else at Broadreach about, and they can hook you up with that information. So yeah, that is the end on my presentation, and I really appreciate you guys listening. I'm happy to answer any other questions that people have right now. If you do have questions into the future, feel free to contact me. My email is clovitz@gmail.com, or you can find me on my Instagram or on my website. And I will just respond to Chiara here. Her name is Verena A. She's going to think it's very funny when she sees this recording and realizes I've been talking about her online. So yeah, does anybody else have any other questions at all? I'll give people a few seconds so that yeah, Virginia, do you have a question?
No, just waiting to see if anybody else does. But I would love to hear, will you share a little bit about your marine mammal studies program that you did with Broadreach, and like what types of experiences those students got to have, and because those relate to some of the other, conservation type programs we have and other experiences that might help relate to students that are interested in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent a few weeks traveling through Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and it was a lot of camping and staying at remote field stations, which was just really fun to be at these locations in the middle of nowhere on Vancouver Island, these like kind of cabins in the woods, and you'd leave your room and there'd be a humpback whale feeding off the dock in bioluminescence. So that was pretty amazing. And that course is really an intro to marine mammals in general. So we look also at pinnipeds, not just at cetaceans. So you learn about stellar sea lions, seals, whales, dolphins, etc. And we do a lot of observation, a lot of practicing field skills. So out on the boat, we do learn about invertebrates and fishes to some extent. Yeah, so it's kind of just like an all-around intro course and overview in marine environments, conservation, marine mammal ecology, field research, etc. Yeah,
cool.
It's a great opportunity. If anyone gets a chance to take that course again in the future, it's really fun.
We're gonna bring you back, Kim.
Yeah, I know.
I'm in. I'm in.
Sounds good. And then the other courses, of course, are great, I'm sure, in Italy and Greece. So similar topics, just obviously a different ecosystem. And then there's a few other questions here from Kelsey. Do I have a favorite stock of belugas? Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like I need to learn, before I can really answer that question, I need to learn more about like stocks in Russia. There's like a lot of like understudied stocks that people don't know a lot about. So I'd love to learn about them. But favorite stocks of the stocks that I know, I have to say Cook Inlet. It's like, there's only 300 of them, and I've spent now like months, if not years of my life watching individual whales, and you start to sort of feel connected with them when you see, you're not totally sure because you're just observing, but you think that you keep seeing the same ones again and again in the same places, and you sort of build a relationship with them. So definitely that. Another question, if someone wanted to volunteer in Alaska, would that be possible? If so, what kind of gear or clothing would be needed? Alaska is the best place I've ever been in my life. You should absolutely go and work there or volunteer there or intern there. There are so many opportunities. It's a very transient place. There are lots of ways to get involved with fish conservation and management, fisheries research, marine mammal work. So look for sure into like your state and federal government listings, USA jobs, get on some marine lists, like marine job lists. MARMAM is one. It's a listserv. You'll have to Google it, M-A-R-M-A-M, MARMAM. That is how I got my PhD position. So it's actually really useful. There's another job list that I can send to Virginia. I don't remember the name of it now, but it's a great place to find opportunities. Google intern Alaska, just see what's out there, what kind of gear or clothing would be needed. Depends on the season. Most of the field work in Alaska is in the summer, so it's actually really hot and really nice, but you definitely want to have like long pants for mosquitoes, quick dry clothing because it rains a lot, but it's really beautiful. It doesn't get too cold. The sun's out all night long. It never really sets, so it's an amazing place to work. Are there current volunteering interning opportunities surrounding marine mammals that I know of? Yes, again, check out those job lists. And Google is like a great tool for this. So just Google like marine mammal plus internships. Be a little bit aware that in the marine mammal world, there is a lot of positions that they want you to pay for. So you really should think like, you know, at the intern level, let's say you're an undergrad and you already have your degree, you're probably qualified to just work versus intern for free somewhere. So look for those opportunities because they exist, they're out there. But if money is not a barrier and you don't mind having to pay for an internship, there are some fantastic opportunities as well that'll get you out to remote areas all around the globe. And then by paying to participate in that program, you're supporting their conservation efforts. So that's not a bad deal either. And yeah, I'll definitely send some more info to Virginia and she can circulate some of the recommendations that I have. Can Americans study stocks in Russia? From Kelsey. That's a great question. Verena Gill has studied in Russia, is my understanding. I remember some stories of that. I think that you can find ways to do that. It's probably best to do that through collaboration. So oftentimes, any science that's being done is being done in a collaborative way with a team of researchers, and you can connect with teams of researchers from abroad and help them out with a specific issue. I do know of some scientists from the States that have been involved in work in Russia, but could you, as like a lone American scientist, go conduct research in Russia right now? Questionable. I wouldn't be the best resource to comment on that, but I think the geopolitical issues would probably come into play. And you see that happen in the sciences for sure. Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. Anything else that anyone can think of? No? Oh, here we go. Why belugas? What got me into that? So my background is actually in natural resource like management, but from the perspective of like inequality and oppression. So I started with an undergrad looking at very much like the social side of resource access and trying to understand how different communities of people had different levels of access to resources. So looking a lot at like the concept of environmental racism. And then in thinking about that, I realized that I wanted to have a very practical and applied degree. And I decided I wanted to go more into ecology and to combine those two interests. So I started studying fisheries and started actually with invertebrates and finfish. So I was doing ecological monitoring in the Mississippi River, fish research in northern Argentina, some work in Panama. I did my master's off the coast of Maine. And then I applied to one position with NOAA in Anchorage, Alaska with beluga. I had never worked with whales in my life, and that was the start of now pursuing a PhD in beluga. So it's really amazing just that one opportunity that you get that will change your focus and sort of set you on a different career path. So yeah, if you like belugas, I think the opportunities are out there. But there are plenty of other marine mammals and other organisms to study as well in the marine environment that are exceptional.
That was like the best commercial for everything we just like did this summer. We did like an invertebrates week, we did a fisheries week, we did a fish ecology week.
Great.
So yeah, just like watch them all, get into something and see where they take us. It's really cool.
And it's all connected.
And Kim is also, if you ever, I remember having good conversations with you also about those like Native people and different and like groups of people and the way that they've interacted with the environment, which I think is a really interesting topic. So we might have to have you come back with us later this year and talk about how different communities interact with the environment. I think that would be really fun, and I know that you'd be
Yes.
really awesome with it.
Yeah, I'd love that. That
So
sounds great.
I'm gonna go ahead and throw on, I think it's Wednesday. Adam is going to be talking to us kind of a similar fashion, but instead of beluga, he's going to be talking about sea turtles, which should be really fun. So the sign up is in the chat for anybody that's interested. But I'm going to close the meeting down in about a minute or so. Thank you so much, Kim. This is awesome. Can't wait to go share some of my new fun facts with my friends.
Excellent. Yes, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, feel free to contact me if you have any more questions or comments. Have a good summer.